Welcome to Chapter 4, Business Process and Functional Modeling. Now that we have gathered requirements in order to get a much better understanding of the needs of the new proposed system, what we're going to be doing over the next 3 chapters is organize that data into some coherent sort of structure. We're going to take a look at it from 3 different points of view in order to get an even better and more precise understanding of the exact requirements for the proposed system. The first view that we're going to look at in Chapter 4 is called, it would be considered the user view. We are going to identify the business processes strictly from a user point of view. You can think of it as black box, where the users have no idea what's going on inside the system. All they know is how they interact with it and what happens when they interact with it. In Chapter 5, we're going to look at structural modeling. This is when we take a look at the objects. We're going to see from a static point of view, what are the different objects from an object-oriented point of view, the different objects that make up the new system. And then finally, in Chapter 6, we're going to do behavioral modeling. And that's when we take a look at, internally, the dynamic view. And this is we have already identified the objects, and now we want to watch these objects as they change state or as they move dynamically through the system. So in Chapter 4, we're going to do functional modeling. We have 3 tools that we're going to be using to describe the proposed system from the user's point of view. We're going to be developing use case diagrams, activity diagrams, and use case descriptions. Each of these 3 tools is going to allow us to get a better perspective from the client or from the user's point of view of how this system functions and how it works. This could be considered logical models, because it describes what has to be done, versus physical models, which will come in later chapters, which describe how it needs to be done. Right now, I'm not concerned about how things are done. I just need to clarify the things that need to be done. So what has to be done? So the first tool at our disposal is called a use case diagram. And a use case diagram is made up of several components, the first one being a use case. At its most simplest level, a use case is just an activity that a user performs. For instance, selling a CD, ordering CDs, accepting return CDs from customers. These are activities that a user of the system is going to need to perform. The second component of a use case diagram are the actors. And the actors are the person or the thing that is interacting with the system. They are principal elements in the environment. Users of the system. They can be people who are using the system, or they can be other processes who are receiving information from the system or inputting information into the system. The third element of a use case diagram are the relationships. The use cases or the activities are related in some way to one or more actor. So we're going to indicate those relationships between the use cases and the actors by using lines. The fourth element of a use case diagram is the scope, the boundary. The boundary indicates the portion of our system which is within the system, and the actors or the people or the things that are outside of our system. A lot of times as we're gathering requirements, we come across things that may not be within the scope of the particular system. They may need to be done, but it isn't done by our particular system. For instance, a customer calls our clerk on the phone. That probably needs to be done in order to instantiate or to initiate, say, a new appointment with a doctor, but that particular part where the customer is at home, picks up the phone and dials our clerk, that is outside of the scope of our system. It may be a trigger, but our system is only concerned with what happens when the clerk answers the phone and begins to schedule an appointment. Figure 4.1 on page 156 of our textbooks lists the different elements that make up a use case diagram. We're going to be using Microsoft Visio in our class for the rest of the semester. So you might want to, if you don't currently have access to Microsoft Visio, and I'm using version 2013. If you don't have access to that, you can get it for free from Microsoft. If you go to our CS department website and look up MSDNAA, Microsoft is more than happy to give students free Microsoft products, and Visio is one of those products you can get for free. All right, so I'm going to turn to Visio, and we want to click on the Software tab. And under the Software tab, I am going to find a type of diagram, a UML diagram, that is called a use case diagram. It is pretty noticeable because it has symbols of people on it. Now, depending upon the version of the Visio that you're using, they may be stick figure people, or they may be more fleshed out people. This is 2013, and so I'm going to select on a UML use case diagram, and it is going to open that diagram for me. And it's going to give me some options for some shapes that I can use on the left-hand side, and it's going to give me a page that I can drag and drop things to on the right-hand side. So the first thing I'm going to do in creating a use case diagram is place the use cases. So I'm going to drag a use case, which once again is a business process, an activity that a user is going to perform. I'm going to drag some use cases onto the screen. These are going to be some different activities that my users of the system are going to perform. If I double click on one of the use cases, I can type in the name of this particular use case. So this would be manage appointments. If I was going to create a use case diagram for an appointment system, the first activity would be managing appointments. I'm going to double click on the second activity, and I'm going to say produce schedules. Another activity that users of this system, or that this system needs to perform, is we need to be able to produce schedules and then record availability. So when I click off of it, I can see that use case inside of my diagram. Once I have identified use cases or activities of the system, the next thing that I need to do is I need to define some of the actors. And so I'm going to grab the icon for an actor, and I'm going to drag them and drop them onto my system. Once again, if I double click on the icon for the actor, the symbol for the actor, it will allow me to indicate the role that this particular actor plays. Keep in mind that actor is not a specific person. An actor is a role. So I wouldn't say Mary Jane or Stephen Monty. I would say clerk, management, doctor, patient. An actor is just a role. So we have management and we have a doctor. These will be the two actors who are acting on our system at this time. We also want to include a patient. Because what is an appointment system if we don't have somebody to make an appointment for? So I'm going to include a patient on my use case diagram. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to define what the relationships are between these use cases and the actors. The relationship between an actor and one or more use cases is indicated by an association. I'm going to click on the connector tool, and I'm going to use lines in order to connect an actor with an associated use case. So there are a number of different types of associations or relationships. The first one is an association. Under my Home tab, on the ribbon, there is a Tools subsection, and under that there's a connector. If I highlight the connector, and then I click on an association, an association is just a general relationship between two objects. So I can click on the management, and if I drag him and drop him, this creates a solid line between an actor and a use case. So let me delete those two, because a patient is going to be associated with managing appointments. Management, on the other hand, is going to be associated with producing schedules, and our doctor is going to be the one who is recording his availability to see patients. All right, so we have a very basic use case diagram. I am going to move these symbols a little bit because we want to add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go back to my home page in the Tools ribbon, and I'm going to click on the pointer so that I can drag my doctor to move a little bit, because we want to add a little bit of complexity to our diagram. Because managing appointments is a pretty global sort of activity. So if I were to break manage appointments down into several smaller pieces, I might have a use case called make new patient appointments, or perhaps I should say new patient appointments, and then I want make old patient appointments, which perhaps I should call make current patient appointments. So I am going to drop 2 more use cases on there, and I'm going to say make current patient appointment. And then on the second use case, I am going to say that it is make new patient appointment. And then I'm going to manipulate these use cases so that they don't take up as much space. All right, so these are types of or activities that are a part of managing appointments. And so there's actually another relationship that we can look at, and it is called generalization. So if you'll notice, there's going to be an association over here called generalization. And the point of a generalization is it denotes inheritance. So making a current patient appointment is a child of the parent called managing appointments. And the same can be said of make a new patient appointments. They are a type of or a subset of a managing appointment. So I'm going to come back on my home tab. I'm going to click on my connector tool again. This time I'm going to select generalization. And so I'm going to go from the child to the parent. I'm going to go from the child to the parent. And if you'll notice when I do that, I now have arrows pointing from the child to the parent. That particular line indicates a generalization, an inheritance. So if I'm going to make a current patient appointment and a new patient appointment, I probably need a specialized sort of actor. I'm probably going to need an actor who is a new patient, and I'm also going to need a specialized actor who is a current patient, which means I'm going to want to add the same sort of association, the generalization association, between my new patient and his parent, or the base class called patient. I also want a relationship or a generalization association between my current patient. And if I change my pointer back to the pointer tool, and I double click on this one, it is going to allow me to say new patient. And I am going to double click on this actor, and he is the current patient. And they seem to have a line connected, the 2 of them. Let me delete that line. So we can have associations or inheritance among actors as well as among use cases. Once again, notice how it's a solid line with the arrow pointing to the parent, also known as the base class. Once I have my 2 specialized actors on the screen, I need to associate my actors with their use cases. So I'm going to click on the connector tool. I'm going to create an association relationship, and then I'm going to click on my actor, and I am going to associate the new patient with a new patient use case. And then I'm going to associate the current patient with the current patient appointment. But I don't really want that line driving across my new patient. So if I right-click on my association and I select right angle connector, it should give me a right angle connection. So an association is a general relationship. A generalization denotes inheritance. We're going to talk about additional types of relationships between objects on my use case diagram. The first one is going to be includes. The include relationship would indicate a part of a larger. So you have something that is a requirement that is part of a larger. I'm going to take a new use case, and I'm going to drag him onto the screen, because a part of making a new patient appointment is going to be creating a new patient. If I have a brand new patient, I'm going to need to create him or get information from my new patient long before I can ever make a new patient appointment. So if on this use case I define it as create new patient, then I'm going to select the association called includes. So I'm going to come back and select my connector tool. I'm going to select includes, and then I am going to drag from the larger portion to the smaller part or the smaller segment. If you'll notice now, there's going to be an error from the larger part to the smaller part. So this includes something as a required but is a smaller part of a larger whole. That is what the includes relationship indicates. We also have another type of a relationship that is called extend. And extends would indicate some sort of an optional functionality. It's not required, but it would be optional. So let's say make current patient appointment. The first thing when I go to my doctor, the first thing that they ever say to me is, do you still have the same insurance? Are you still at this same address? Is this still your same phone number? And if any of that information has changed, then they want to update my patient information. But it's optional because it only needs to be updated in the event that something has changed. So I'm going to click back in my tools bar to my pointer. I'm going to double click on this new use case that I dragged and dropped, and I'm going to call this one Update Patient Information. When I click on it, I am going to make it a little bit smaller in size, and I'm going to drag it over. And then I am going to click back on my connector tool. This time I'm going to type Extend. I'm going to select Extend. And I am going to start with the optional functionality, and I'm going to drag my connector up to the larger part, or the part that it is an optional value for. You're going to notice that the arrow points from the optional use case up to the use case. Let me make sure I'm on my pointer. Up to the use case that it is an optional portion of. So the arrow points to the use case that it is an optional piece of. So now we have defined a little bit more about our use case diagram. We're going to add a few more pieces to this. I have a use case called Produces Schedules and a use case called Records Availability. And I would say that these are both smaller parts of a larger use case, which we could call Manage Schedules. So if I were to drag a new use case onto the screen, double click on it, Manage Schedules, and then I'm going to add an association and include an association between the smaller parts to the larger part of the whole. I click on the connector, and this is includes. And I'm going to say Manage Schedules includes producing schedules. I'm going to go from the part to the whole so that the arrow is pointing at the larger part. And then there's one additional use case that I'm going to add as a part of an appointment system, and that is making payment arrangements. So making a payment arrangement is a part of or extends managing appointments, because it is an optional functionality. Let me click on this. Make payment arrangements. I'm going to reduce the size of that use case. Move him over. This is an optional part of managing appointments, because if I'm dealing with a new and existing patient, he may already have payment arrangements. So it is an optional part of managing appointments. That would indicate that it is an extend relationship. I'm going to click on my connector in the Tools menu. I'm going to click on Extend, and then I'm going to draw the line from the optional functionality to the use case that it is optional for. And when I click off that, you can see that it is labeled the association as they extend, and the arrow is pointing to the larger use case. As I mentioned at the first of this, there are 4 elements of the use case diagram. There are actors, the users of the system. There are use cases. Those are functionalities or activities that our users perform that benefit the actors in some way. And the fourth, there's relationships which define how a user is associated with a use case. And then the final element is the boundary. And the boundary indicates what is a part of, what is inside of my system and what is outside of my system. And so if you'll notice this icon called Subsystem, and if I select, let me do the selector tool, and I click on Subsystem, if I come back to my use case diagram and I drag and drop, hold down my cursor, it is going to draw a box. And this box is going to indicate the boundary of my use case. For the most part, your users are not a part of the system. They interact with the system, but they are not a part of the system. The activities or the use cases inside will be a part of the system, but the actors on the outside are not. All right, let's do that one more time. I'm going to drag and drop a subsystem onto my screen, and it comes up as a text box. And then I can just change his size by using the arrows to drag him to include the elements on the screen or on my diagram that actually are a part of my system. And so I only want to include the use cases. The last thing that I'm going to do, if you'll notice, I can click up here in the corner and it will allow me to give a name for this particular use case diagram. And this is going to be our appointment system. So I'm going to name it as an appointment system, and now I have all of the elements of a use case diagram. So if I were to reduce the size of this diagram, we should be able to see more and more of my diagram. These are the four elements, the four main components of a use case diagram. The next video is going to help us to figure out how to define use cases. How do I go about figuring out what the use cases are?